Even though I watched my first anime in 2014, I really started being a true fan when the second season of My Hero Academia was airing in 2017. I binge-watched the whole series on Funimation and fell in love, not just with the show, but with the medium of storytelling anime brings. The way you can listen to the characters' thoughts in their own heads, the focus on complex character growth and development, and the flashy, over-the-top fight scenes. From there, I was introduced to a whole new world of content filled with literally thousands of new universes, characters, and stories. While I found some that hit my niche and I enjoyed, it still felt like something was missing. Some crucial piece that I could hold to the same standard as Star Wars, my favorite series of all time. One that can jump at any point in its timeline, reference past or upcoming events smartly, and expertly tie everything together. At the end of my school day, sometime back in 2018, I was browsing the App Store on my iPad when I found a game that had characters from a few anime I've seen called Dengeki Bunko Crossing Void. I played the app and, after liking it, decided to watch one anime at random. The anime I picked was not only the series I fell deeply in love with, but is also a series that I could finally hold to be as complex and intriguing as Star Wars, and a franchise that screams for your attention. That series was called Toaru, and the show that was at the head of it, A Certain Magical Index. After watching the series, I tried telling my friends about it and how it was sort of an underrated masterpiece. However, I don't think my explanations were ever good enough to get too many people interested. There is a lot to this series, and a short phrase or tagline would really do it a disservice. That's why I'm making this video. I want to explain concisely why I love this series so much, and why you, the viewer, should give it a chance. So let's talk a little about it. By the way, this will contain extremely minor spoilers for the first season of each show, as I really do want you to check it out, and giving too much away. Certain Magical Index, or Toaru Majutsu no Index, was written by Kazuma Kamachi and published by Dengeki Bunko starting in 2004. Index is actually a light novel series, meaning it reads more like a normal book, unlike a manga, which is more like a comic book. It wasn't until 2008 that Index received an anime adaptation done by JC Staff. We'll get to them later, don't you worry, we have a lot to talk about with them. Through the anime, the series garnered a lot more intrigue and attention by more mainstream audiences. What first viewers will realize about the start of the show is how baked in mystery it is. PSI Missing by Mayami Kawada is a perfect opening song to convey how unknown the world is currently. We're in the dark for how it works in the beginning, and only over time do we finally start to figure out how it functions, but for the purposes of this video, I'll lay out somewhat of a foundation for you. The basics are that this world has two types of powers: the power of science and the power of magic. The majority of the show takes place in Academy City, basically an entire city that's specifically made up of academies and other learning institutions. Here, students are sent by their parents to train and hone their Esper abilities, which are essentially scientific augmentations given to them at a young age. Meanwhile, across the world, multiple churches and religions study their beliefs and spells to learn magical abilities that they can cast to protect themselves and fight against evil. While the science side tends to draw its powers from real-world scientific facts, the magic/religious side tends to draw its power from actual real-world religions and sometimes other mythologies. In person, both magic and science have corrupt individuals in places of power, who have less than heroic intentions. But that doesn't mean everyone a part of each faction is a bad person. I think a lot of people seem to think the people on the side of magic are bad, because many spellcasters start out as minor antagonists that attack our main heroes. But I think the point Kamachi was trying to make is that there are always groups of people that are twisted, but there are also good people a part of every faction. And even if they were once bad, everyone has the capacity to change. It's not black and white. Similar to our world, it's a gray mess that we have to make the best of despite of everything. Speaking of those sides, let's talk about our main character, Toma Kamajo. Toma is a really bland protagonist at face value for many casual watchers. Everyone who talks about the show that isn't a diehard fan kinda feels that Toma and his power are a boring duo compared to many other interesting characters in the show. But I think the point of Toma is he's perfectly in the middle of these two opposing sides. You see, while Toma is labeled as an Esper, his power isn't from the magic or science side. It's actually unknown how his power fully works, what limits he could reach, or where it came from. All we know is that it's called a magic breaker, and it has the power to cancel out any other magic or scientific ability with a single touch or punch. This essentially means Toma can counter almost any power in this world. Making Toma distinctly a middle ground character lets him fight for and against both sides of magic and science. He has no allegiance to either, and that gives his character way more flexibility for story arcs. It also helps that he has a very noble heart and great sense of justice. Because of that, I actually like him quite a bit as a protagonist. But you see, he's not the only protagonist of the Index series. That's where my favorite part of the series comes in. It's a cinematic universe! You see, 3 years after the release of the first Index light novel, a spin-off manga series titled A Certain Scientific Railgun, or Toaru Kaku no Railgun, started its publication. The books were still written by Kazuma Kamachi, but illustrated by artist Motoi Fuyukawa. The series centers around a supporting character in the original series called Makoto Misaka, one of the most powerful espers in Academy City, with the power of electric currents and magnetism. In 2009, only 1 year after Index's first season, Railgun also received an anime of its own. Railgun was way more well received by casual audiences, who enjoyed the show on its own without watching Index. While Index got its second season, Railgun also received a second titled Railgun S. But this is the season that really proves why Index deserves a wider audience, because we get to see an early arc in the first season of Index, a heartbreaking one that involves Misaka, from her point of view instead of Toma's. Now scenes that might have seemed confusing on first viewing make complete sense with the new context Railgun provides. It only deepens the tragedy and how far people will go for the sake of science. There's no way I'm going to spoil this for you. You're just gonna have to trust me. This was the first time this show really made me think and look back on past scenes. Not only did Railgun give a great reason for why it should exist, but also a reason for the many other spin-offs that follow after. It helps expand on the characters and can deepen plot points by picking up at different points in the series' timeline, exactly like what Star Wars has been doing through spin-off movies, games, and the TV shows like The Mandalorian and Star Wars The Clone Wars. Now you know a bit about the show and why it's really unique and interesting. I haven't even tapped into the great side characters, spin-off mangas that haven't been adapted into anime yet, the games, the movie, and the fantastic fight scenes. So you might be thinking, well, this all sounds great. Why haven't I heard of it until now? Well, remember how I mentioned a little studio named JC Staff at the beginning of this video? The one who animates the series? Well, that's one of the reasons. It's not exactly a hot take to say JC Staff is very hit or miss when it comes to adapting anime. I really do believe one of the reasons why Railgun is more beloved than Index is because it's a manga instead of a light novel, which is way easier to adapt considering it's essentially a set of storyboards. It's easy to look at scenes already drawn in the source material and animate them in interesting ways. For a light novel, you're essentially working from scratch and maybe a few key drawings sprinkled throughout. That still doesn't defend JC Staff, however. I actually think their animation looks fine most of the time in the first 2 seasons, and very good in Railgun and the other spin-off Accelerator. However, they really dropped the ball on the 3rd season. It was supposed to be the great return of Toaru after nearly 5 years of no new seasons, and it started with a whimper. This, I think, is the biggest detracting factor when it comes to watching this series. Sometimes, it can have really great and intense animation, but other times it can be stiff and rough. I won't pin it all on JC Staff, however, because one of the other biggest detractors on why people just don't watch it is how much of it there really is. There are currently 7 seasons of content that have been animated across 3 shows, not to mention the OVAs and the movie. You also have the plethora of light novels, manga, games, and other content to look at on top of that. This is an entire franchise that might seem like a lot when you first learn about it. There's also the fact that the opening arc is kinda boring. The first 6 episodes of the show faithfully adapt the first major arc of the light novel in detail. However, the show is known to cut content after this arc and not include every story arc that was in the source material. It sucks, but this is a common trend when it comes to anime adaptations of light novels. Sometimes there's just too much to fit into a single season. I actually like this change though. Since not everything is animated into the show, it makes it super enjoyable to read the light novels. You get to learn about new things that were cut from the show and new story beats that you would have otherwise missed. However, because the first arc is adapted in detail, it makes it kind of a boring first few episodes. I actually pushed my friend to watch it since he was super bored after the 3rd episode, but then, after the 6th, he was engaged tremendously and never really wavered after that. Let me just say, the first 6 episodes are enjoyable, it's just they feel like the JoJo Phantom Blood of the show. A set of kind of boring episodes that only scratch the surface of what this world and story can provide. While these are detractors, I still do love the show, and once you get past the first 6 episodes, you're open to a pretty incredible world. But why take my word for it? How about another YouTuber that enjoys it? That's why I asked my friend Casette, or Oracle Anime, to give her thoughts about why the show appeals. What are your thoughts, Casette?
Thank you 3PO for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on Toaru and its popularity. I've been a Toaru fan for many years and quite frankly my appreciation for the series and franchise as a whole has only grown over time. I think to me the most appealing factors of the series are the worldview and the systems in place. I mean, we have real life nations like the US, Russia or even UK be a part of the conflicts, and even the socio-economic scenarios also play a role, like say in GT4. Then there is the power system which we get to see in play during the battles. It has thelema, real-world mythology and systematic practices that serve as drivers to manifest supernatural phenomena. The way the abilities, despite having a common origin, were segregated into 2 opposing categories like science and magic, and the way the main conflicts emerge from that while centering around the 3 main characters is honestly brilliant. For me, Toaru is a neatly crafted combination of all these interesting elements which keeps evolving with every new volume, and I hope as a franchise it keeps getting more popular.
As you can see, we did have some Yage Hamazura and Accelerator. First, let's start with Accelerator. Accelerator doesn't really have the most normal arc for a protagonist, considering he actually starts out as a pretty unlikable villain. You see, in the first season of the show, when we first meet Accelerator, we see him commit horrible, heinous acts. On top of that, we also found out that he's committed many more in the past. He's presented as a vile person that has no redeeming qualities whatsoever, a traditional anime bad guy that the creator expects audiences to hate. After he's defeated, however, he comes back later in the season, and we get to know a bit more about him. Even though he's committed horrible deeds and he still seems like a jerk on the surface, the show presents the simple fact that maybe he's not all bad, as he essentially sacrifices himself in order to save someone else, and he does it countless times. More and more throughout the show, we get to know more about him and how he's living with his regret. He knows he can't make up for his past sins, so instead of trying to be a hero, he keeps reaffirming himself as a villain while doing heroic things. Accelerator in this regard is kind of the definition of a great anti-hero. He doesn't have any great heroic qualities, but he does do heroic things. The cherry on top is that arc of episodes from Railgun S I mentioned earlier, the ones that were readapted from the first season of Index. He was the main villain of that arc after all. Now, we get to see Accelerator again, with all of the character growth we've seen over 2 seasons, back to who he was before we got to know him. Now we can see this villain in a different light. We get to see his mind and see what he was thinking, his regrets, his hopes, his future. It's absolutely master storytelling that only reaffirmed how great the arc truly is. And finally, we have Hamazura. Unlike the other 3 protagonists who all started in the first season of Index, Hamazura showed up a bit later at the end of season 2. You see, Hamazura presents a new angle for telling stories in this world, because he's the first protagonist we've had that has absolutely no powers at all. He's a true clean slate to see the archetype of an unwilling hero, an ordinary person thrown into extraordinary events. Together, Hamazura and the members of his team, Item, present the truth that Academy City doesn't functionally work as we might have thought. These are all kids who are forced to find ways to survive in the dark underworld of the city, essentially forming their own criminal gangs to survive. They've been split up into teams like Item, Group, and Member. Teams of people working together to do odd jobs for the city and survive. Hamazura is essentially a grunt, a pawn who would most likely die when facing an Esper magician. Yet somehow, through sheer luck and skill, he survives, and shows that no matter how strong you may be, you can still be beat by the weakest of them all. Now you know the 4 main characters we get to follow, at least in what we have animated so far. There are many more spin-offs where other side characters or even completely new characters get a chance to take the spotlight and show us their viewpoint on the world and have their own adventure. But currently, we only have 3 shows. One following Toma as the lead and the others in major character roles, one that follows Makoto with her group of friends which features Toma as a reoccurring character, and one that follows Accelerator after his major character change. There is still so much to explore in potential future seasons of the shows, and new shows that could pop up in the future, and I'm super excited to see how they're going to make them. So, there you have it. That's basically every amazing thing about the Toaru series I could think of. There is still so much I could talk about, but I really do want to leave the show open for you to discover on your own, to see the world and story unfold in front of your eyes. But I do want to briefly leave you with the watch order I think works best. Don't worry, it'll be simple. Start with Index Season 1, then Railgun Season 1, then move on to Index Season 2, then Railgun Season 2, watch the Miracle of Endemon movie at any point after this, since its events don't affect the show too much and you can check it out at any time, watch the only existing season of Accelerator currently, then Index Season 3, then finally Railgun Season 3. From there, if you still want more, I'd recommend reading the spin-off A Certain Scientific Railgun Astral Buddy. It's only 4 books long, and it's a manga. There are many other watch orders, but this is the one that I would recommend from experience. But now you might be wondering, well, you talked about the show a lot, but you never really gave a plot synopsis. What's the goal? And the honest answer is, there is no goal. We are all just watching the experiences of these characters' lives and the problems they encounter. Every character in this universe has their own story. Nobody's just a throwaway character. Everyone's important. That means that to give you a synopsis, I need to tell you about every single character. There are so many moving parts that it's impossible to describe all of it. Well, impossible without spoilers, that is. Honestly, to leave you off, it's better to quote the show itself when it comes to a sentence to encapsulate this whole series. When science and magic cross paths, a story is born. Thank you to Ebora over on Twitter for making this beautiful thumbnail. Go and give him a follow if you're interested in his art.